A hand. At first, it was just a hand pushing up through dry, cracked sand. The fingers were thick, the knuckles split and dark with dried blood, and the nails were broken. It moved slowly, painfully slow, like something that had been struggling to survive for a long time and was almost out of hope. And then it stops, and the woods go quiet around it. She was 8 months pregnant, and this was the last thing she could afford. She had two choices: protect her child and walk away, or save the most dangerous man in the city. She recognized the ring immediately. No one who saw it ever forgot it. And yet, she reached down anyway. This is the story of what that one decision cost her, and what it gave her daughter. Stay with me. What happened in those woods outside Memphis on that October afternoon is a story that stays with you. It's the kind you remember late at night, wondering what you would have done. Would you walk away, or would you reach down? Most of us think we know, but few have faced what Sarah Calloway did that day. She was 29, 8 months pregnant, just trying to get her 6-year-old daughter home before dark. With every step on that trail, she worried Lily might see her mother suffer in a way she couldn't protect her from, or that her unborn child might arrive into a life always on the edge of falling apart.
The leaves are so beautiful this year.
That fear never left Sarah's
Me
mind.
too, sweetie.
Before you hear what happened in those woods, I want you to think about something. Can you remember a moment when everything changed all at once? Not gradually, but in an instant. One breath. One choice. 1 second. Everything splits into before and after. For Sarah, that moment came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. There was no warning. Just a dirt path. The sound of her daughter's boots on dry leaves, and a hand in the sand. To really understand what happened, you need to know who Sarah was. The choice she made came from everything she had already survived and the strength that kept her moving forward. Her decision was also shaped by her 6-year-old daughter Lily, who showed her, without knowing it, that the real danger isn't a powerful man, but a heart that closes itself off from others. So let's go back. Not to the woods, but to a diner on Route 70. That's where this story really begins. The Blue Ridge Diner sat on the edge of Collierville, Tennessee. The town was close enough to Memphis to feel the city's energy, but far enough away that people still waved from their driveways. The diner had 8 booths, a counter with 12 stools, a jukebox in the corner that only played 3 songs because the other buttons were stuck, and a coffee machine that sputtered and hissed every morning like it was reluctant to start the day. Sarah had worked there for 4 years. She started when Lily was 2, right after her ex-husband Danny left. He didn't leave with a fight or a slammed door, but quietly, the way some people do when they can't face things. He left a note on the kitchen table saying he wasn't ready for this kind of life, as if Sarah had chosen it alone, or Lily had arrived uninvited. Sarah read the note once, folded it, put it in the kitchen drawer, and never opened that drawer again. She was 25 then. She had $60 in her checking account, a car with a cracked windshield, a 2-year-old who still woke up twice a night, and no family nearby. Her mother had passed away 3 years earlier from a stroke, and her father had remarried and moved to Arizona. He sent birthday cards that arrived 2 weeks late and Christmas checks that bounced twice. What Sarah had was herself, and most days, that was enough. She got the job at the Blue Ridge because the owner, a heavy-set Greek woman named Dottie Papadakis, had known Sarah's mother and hired her without an interview. "You look like her," Dottie told her on the first day, squinting at Sarah's face. "Around the eyes. Your mama had eyes that looked like they already knew things were going to be hard and made peace with it." She handed Sarah an apron. Don't drop the coffee. People here take their coffee seriously. Sarah never dropped the coffee. Not once in 4 years. She was good at her job in the quiet way people are when they do things well without looking for praise. She remembered orders without writing them down and learned regulars' preferences after hearing them once. Sarah noticed which stools wobbled and gently guided older customers to safer seats. She paid attention to the small things most people missed. She had a gift for seeing people, and that gift would later make what happened in the woods both understandable and frightening. Now, about the pregnancy. The father's name was Marcus Webb. He was a good man, truly, in the way some men are good even if they aren't strong. He worked at an auto parts warehouse 2 towns over, and he and Sarah had been together for a year and a half when she found out she was pregnant. He didn't leave a note. He didn't leave quietly. He cried when she told him, held her hand at the first ultrasound, and painted the nursery a soft yellow one Saturday in February, while Lily sat in the corner, narrating everything he did like a tiny sports commentator. But by the 5th month of the pregnancy, something changed. The weight of it, financial, emotional, the sheer size of what was coming, started to show on Marcus's face in a way he couldn't hide. He began working extra shifts. Though that didn't explain all the hours he was gone, he started answering his phone in the other room. Then, one Sunday morning in late August, he packed a bag, hugged Lily gently, kissed Sarah on the forehead, and said he needed time to think. He never came back. Sarah didn't cry for 2 days, not because she wasn't devastated, but because she didn't have time. Lily needed to be fed. The rent was due on the 1st. There were 7 tables waiting at the Blue Ridge, and Dottie was short a waitress that week. So Sarah tied her apron, tucked her grief deep inside with all the other things she hadn't had time to process, and went to work. By October, she was 8 months pregnant. She was still working 4 shifts a week. Dottie had begged her to stop at 6 months, but Sarah refused. The tips helped. The movement helped too. Being still was worse because it meant thinking. Lily was 6 by then. She was the kind of child who seemed to understand things she hadn't been taught yet. Not in a strange way, but in the way children who grow up around hardship often do. She was thoughtful and watched adults' faces carefully, just like her mother. She carried a worn stuffed bear named Captain everywhere. Captain had one button eye, a patched ear, and the look of an old soldier who had seen a lot. Lily named him Captain because, as she explained very seriously at age 4, he was in charge of keeping bad things away. On the afternoon of October 14th, it was Lily's idea to take the trail. Sarah picked her up from school early because there was a half day for teacher training, and Dottie had covered the last hour of Sarah's shift, waving her out the door. The day was golden and cool, the kind of October afternoon that feels like a gift. Long amber light through the trees, the smell of dry leaves, and a sky so blue it hardly seemed real. Sarah's back ached. Her ankles were swollen, and she had a casserole to make and laundry to fold. But when Lily looked up at her with those serious eyes and asked, "Mama, can we walk through the woods way home? Captain says we should," Sarah said yes, even though she'd promised herself to stop saying yes to things that made life harder. The trail was familiar. Sarah and Lily had walked it many times before. It wound through pine and oak, crossed a shallow creek on a wooden footbridge, and came out behind the old fairgrounds on the south side of town. It was a long way home, but the light was beautiful. Lily was holding her hand, and Captain was tucked under Lily's arm, ready for whatever came next. They were about halfway through, maybe 20 minutes in, when Lily stopped walking. "Mama?" Her voice was different. Not scared, but different, careful. Sarah stopped, looked down at her daughter. Lily wasn't looking at her. She was looking off to the left, past a line of oak trees, toward a shallow dirt
The
embankment
leaves
where
are
the ground
so
sloped down from the
beautiful
trail's
this year.
edge.
Yeah,
What is it,
I
baby?
love them.
Me
Something's
too,
moving in the
sweetie.
dirt. Sarah looked where Lily was pointing and didn't see anything at first. Just the tree line, the slope of sand and dried leaves, and the last flat light of the afternoon cutting through the branches. Then she saw it. Movement, low and slow, at the base of the embankment, half hidden by brush and shadow. Her first thought was that it was an animal, maybe a dog or a lost deer. She took a step closer, holding Lily's hand tightly. It was a hand. A man's hand, thick-fingered and bloodied. I pushed up through dry, packed earth, as if something terrible had happened here, and the ground was trying to keep the secret but couldn't. The fingers moved slowly, desperately, then stopped. It felt like a long time, but it was probably only a few seconds. "Stay here," she told Lily. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "Mama, hold Captain tight and stay here." She moved down the slope, one hand braced against the trunk of an oak to keep her balance on the loose ground, the other hand over her belly the way it always went now, a protective reflex she hadn't needed to learn. She reached the embankment and looked down. A man was buried in the dirt up to his chest. Not deeply. The earth was loose and sandy, the kind that crumbles and shifts, and it looked like he had been dumped there, not carefully placed. He was face down, his head turned to one side, his cheek pressed against the ground. He wore what had once been a very expensive dark suit. Even through the grime and blood, Sarah could see the quality of the fabric, the kind no one in Collierville wore to work. His face was badly beaten. One eye was swollen shut, his lip split in two places, and dried blood streaked his temple and matted his dark hair. Each breath he took was ragged, the kind that sounds like it could be the last. Sarah knelt down beside him, though knelt was generous for what her body actually managed, more of a careful lowering she'd feel for a week, and put 2 fingers to the side of his throat. His pulse was there, slow and unsteady, like a signal cutting in and out. She pulled back and looked at his right hand, the one that had been clawing at the surface. On his middle finger was a ring. She saw it clearly in the fading light, heavy gold, with a black stone in the center and a small engraved design along the band, a shape she'd seen before. Not on anyone she knew, but on a news broadcast maybe 2 years ago. A federal indictment. The evening news had shown photos of FBI agents outside a building in Memphis. A name she'd heard in hushed tones at the diner by men who lowered their voices. Vincent Caruso. She knew that name. Everyone in Shelby County who paid even a little attention knew that name. Vincent Caruso wasn't a myth or a rumor. He was a real man who ran real things: construction contracts, waste management, and a network of protection agreements covering everything from nightclubs to dry cleaners within 40 miles of Memphis. He'd been investigated 3 times, indicted once, but never convicted. He was 52, born in South Memphis to a Sicilian father who came over with nothing and built something. The kind of thing people didn't talk about openly. His picture had been in the commercial appeal twice, both times in a very expensive dark suit. Now he was buried in the woods, beaten nearly to death and left like something to be forgotten. In that moment, Sarah understood 3 things at once. First, someone had tried to kill Vincent Caruso but hadn't finished the job. Second, whoever did this would almost certainly come back. Third, her 6-year-old was standing 20 feet up the slope, holding a stuffed bear. Mama. Lily's voice was quiet and close. Sarah looked up. Lily had come down the slope despite being told not to. Because Lily had never in her life done exactly what she was told when something mattered more. She was standing 3 feet away, eyes wide, Captain pressed against her chest. Is he dead? No. Is he going to be? Sarah looked back at the man in the ground. His breathing had slowed even more. Not if I can help it, she said, though she wasn't sure she meant it yet. Her hands, however, acted before her mind could decide. They began brushing dirt away from his shoulders, trying to determine how deeply he was buried and whether she could pull him free. Given her own condition, 34 weeks pregnant, her balance shifted by the weight she was carrying, and the fact that the man likely weighed 200 pounds and was half buried in compacted sand and earth, the odds were overwhelming. She needed help. She pulled her phone from her pocket. No signal. Of course, the Pinewood Trail was a dead zone. She had always known that. Chin and she and Lily routinely lost service around the halfway point. She glanced back at the trail, calculating. The closest edge of the tree line was perhaps a 15-minute walk, even at her current pace. But she could not leave him. Not for 15 minutes. His breathing was off. The rattle sounded ominous. She looked at Lily. Baby, I need you to run. Lily's eyes went very still. Run where? Back to the start of the trail. Run as fast as you can. When you get a signal, call 911. Tell them a man is hurt on the Pinewood Trail, halfway through, near the creek bridge, on the left side embankment. Can you say that back to me? Lily said it back to her. Lily took 3 steps up the slope, then turned back. She walked back down, crossed to Sarah, and pushed Captain into her mother's hands. Take him, she said. Captain keeps bad things away. Then she turned and ran. And Sarah sat in the dirt beside one of the most dangerous men in Tennessee, holding a one-eyed stuffed bear, and talked to him. She didn't know why. Maybe the silence felt wrong. Maybe she was afraid that if he stopped hearing a human voice, something in him would let go. My name is Sarah, she said. I'm going to keep talking to you. You don't have to answer. You just have to keep breathing. Can you do that for me? Just keep breathing. If you were in those woods, if your child was standing on that slope, would you have stayed? Would you have sent your 6-year-old running alone through the trees? What would you have chosen? I believe your answer says something about who you are in the moments that matter. The man didn't respond at first, but after maybe 2 minutes of Sarah talking, telling him about Lily, about the Blue Ridge Diner, Nate about the casserole in the refrigerator and the laundry she hadn't folded and the things waiting for her at home, his fingers moved. Not the desperate clawing of before, just a small, deliberate twitch. Like acknowledgement. Like something in him was still present enough to receive a signal. Okay, Sarah said quietly. You're still in there. His lips moved. She leaned closer. Don't. The word was barely audible. More breath than voice. Don't what? Don't call the police. Sarah sat back. She looked at the ring on his finger. She looked at his beaten face. She looked at the way he had been put in the ground. Not a fight, not a struggle. This had been organized, deliberate. Someone had brought him here on purpose. And the reason he was still breathing instead of dead was not mercy. It was either an oversight or a message. For a split second, she pictured Lily years from now, asking why her mother stopped to help a man like this. The thought made Sarah's heart tighten. Was she teaching her daughter to be wise or to be reckless? At that moment, she realized she could not walk away. Not just for Vincent Caruso, but because the choice she made here would ripple forward to the shape of the woman Lily might one day become. "I already sent my daughter for help," she said carefully. "I can't unsend her." A long silence. The woods settled into the particular quiet of late afternoon, the kind that feels like the whole world is taking a slow breath. Then his one open eye moved and found her face. "Who are you?" His voice was barely there. "Sarah Calloway. I work at the Blue Ridge Diner on Route 70. I was walking my daughter home through the woods." Something in his eye shifted. It was not suspicion, exactly, but a kind of calculation, the sort that likely persisted even here, half buried and wounded. Sarah said, "I have a daughter who told me Captain would keep the bad things away, when I figured that meant both of us." That might have been a laugh if his ribs had been in better condition. Instead, it emerged as a mixture of a groan and a wheeze, ending in a cough that clearly caused him pain. "Don't do that," she said. "Don't laugh. Just breathe." And then, just as she had settled her hand on his shoulder and found a fragile rhythm in the conversation, his breathing stopped. She pressed her fingers back to his throat. The pulse was faint, but still there. She put her palm firmly against his back, between his shoulder blades, and said his name. "Not Mr. Caruso. Not sir. Just Vincent. Clear and steady, the way you call someone back from somewhere far away. 3 seconds. 4. 5. Then a long, shuddering inhale, ragged and deep, like a man surfacing from somewhere he had nearly decided not to return from. She let out the breath she had been holding and kept talking. Her voice didn't waver. She was determined not to let it. But somewhere above her, maybe 40 yards out in the thicker tree line, a branch cracked. She looked up quickly. Nothing moved. The light was fading fast now, shadows stretching across the ground as the sun dropped lower. She realized that within minutes the woods would be almost dark, and if help didn't come soon, she might have to make a choice in near darkness. Probably an animal, she told herself. But she thought about what she knew, about who this man was, about why someone had put him here. And she couldn't afford to assume it was just an animal. Every few seconds, she glanced at the tree line, her nerves tightening as the light drained away. She kept her voice steady and kept talking, counting each moment, aware that time was running out, until at last the siren started in the distance and the shadows didn't feel so close. Those last minutes were some of the longest of Sarah's life. She kept one hand resting lightly on his shoulder because the contact seemed to matter, because her mother had once told her that the body knows it's not alone, even when the mind is too far gone to register it. She told him the temperature was dropping and that she was going to pile some leaves over his back to hold in some warmth. She told him her daughter was fast and had the best memory of any 6-year-old she had ever known. She told him help was coming. She didn't know if she believed it all. But she said it as she did. The light through the trees was going amber to orange when the sirens finally grew close enough to mean something. Then the distant sound of someone crashing through underbrush. Not the careful movement of a person on a trail, but the urgent, careless movement of someone coming fast with purpose. The first person to reach her wasn't a paramedic. It was Lily. She burst through the tree line with her red coat flying behind her and her dark hair tangled from running, and came down the slope so fast that Sarah had to put out one arm to stop her from sliding all the way into the embankment. Lily grabbed her mother's arm, looked at the man on the ground, and held very tightly without a word. 2 paramedics arrived 40 seconds later, then 2 deputies from the Shelby County Sheriff's Office, then 2 more paramedics. The scene that followed was controlled, loud, and purposeful. Sarah was moved up the slope, a blanket placed around her shoulders, a paramedic crouching in front of her asking questions about the baby's movement and her own condition. She answered everything clearly and watched over the paramedic's shoulder as the men below worked to extract Vincent Caruso from the ground. He was alive when they loaded him onto the stretcher. That was what she held on to. He was alive. One of the deputies, a broad, patient-faced man named Officer Cole, took her statement there on the trail as the last of the light faded. She told him everything. The walk, the hand in the dirt, the ring, Lily running for help. She didn't mention what Vincent had said about the police. That felt like something to think about later. Cole looked down at his notepad. "Are you aware of who this individual is?" "I'm aware," she said. "And you stayed with him." "I stayed with him." Cole wrote something in his notepad. "We're going to need you to come in tomorrow and give a formal statement. And ma'am, you'll want to be careful in the days ahead. A situation like this one." He paused, choosing his words. "It tends to have complicated consequences for people involved." "Everything in my life has complicated consequences," she said. "I'm not a stranger to that." She made her way home, prepared the casserole, and later folded the laundry at 11 o'clock at night while Lily slept in the next room. Sitting with the weight of the day, she tried to understand what she felt about it all. It was not fear. Not yet. Rather, it was something unnamed, an emotion that had not yet taken shape. It felt like standing at the edge of a chapter she had not agreed to be part of. Dottie called at 7 the next morning. "I heard something happened on the Pinewood Trail." "Yes." "Are you all right?" "Yes." "Is the baby all right?" "Yes." A long pause. "Sarah." "Who did you find in those woods?" Sarah set down her coffee. "You already know, Dottie." Another pause. "Half the county knows by morning. You know that, don't you? Something like this doesn't stay quiet." She knew. She gave her formal statement to the sheriff's department the next morning. A federal task force agent was there. A calm, deliberate woman named Agent Patricia Holt, who asked precise, pointed questions and wrote everything down as if she would use every word. Sarah answered honestly. When Agent Holt asked about what Vincent had said while they were alone in the woods, Sarah told her he had said very little. She wasn't technically lying. She was editing. That distinction felt important to her, though she knew it probably wouldn't matter to anyone else. Holt wrote something, then looked up. "You said you were there about 20 minutes before your daughter returned with responders." "That's right. That's a long time to sit alone with someone in his position." She said it evenly, without accusation, but the sentence had weight. The kind meant to see if something changed in the person it was aimed at. Sarah met her eyes and said nothing for a moment. Then, "It was a long time," she agreed. "I talked to him so he wouldn't lose consciousness. That was all." Holt nodded and wrote it down. Whether she believed it completely was another question, and one Sarah had no way of answering. What wasn't public was why he had been put in those woods, who had ordered it, who had carried it out, and what it meant for the people around him. The theory that quietly circulated among the diner regulars, in the deputy's radio traffic, and how in the careful way certain people in town started avoiding certain topics, was that Vincent had made an enemy within his own organization. The attempt on his life wasn't from outside. It was internal. A betrayal. Someone close to him had decided he was a liability. That kind of betrayal Sarah understood more than most people expected. She knew what it looked like when someone you trusted decided you were a problem to be solved. Surface and complicated underneath. Sarah worked her shifts. Though Dottie quietly rearranged the schedule so Sarah never had to close alone. Lily went to school, came home, did her homework, and at dinner one night looked up from her plate and said very thoughtfully, "Mama, do you think the man from the woods is going to be okay?" "I hope so," Sarah said. Lily considered this. "Captain thinks he is?" she said, with the kind of calm certainty that only small children and very old people manage. "Captain said he felt something different when I gave him to you. Like whatever bad thing was coming already changed direction." Sarah looked at her daughter for a long moment and decided that was probably the wisest thing anyone had said to her in months. What she didn't tell Lily. What she didn't tell Lily, what she hadn't told anyone, was that 3 days after the incident on the trail, an envelope appeared in her apartment mailbox. No return address. Inside was a plain white card with 2 lines of handwriting. The handwriting was careful and deliberate, like someone who learned penmanship when it was taken seriously. It said, "I know what you risked. I don't forget. VC." She read it twice, put it in the kitchen drawer. Not the same drawer as Danny's note, a different drawer. Locked the front door before bed. She had not done that before. She didn't tell herself why. She just did it, and stood there for a moment with her hand on the bolt, and then went to check on Lily. "If you're still with me, and I hope you are, I want to ask you something. Have you ever done something good for someone and then wrestled with the fear that goodness might invite danger? Not the fear of the person you helped, but the fear that opening your heart or stepping forward could bring risks you never imagined, and that your choices might echo forward in ways you can't control." That was the single fear that lay quietly under everything for Sarah Calloway in November, 6 weeks after the woods. The fear that trying to do the right thing could still put her daughters in harm's way. She wasn't afraid of Vincent Caruso, not exactly, but of what being connected to him might mean for Lily and the baby inside her. She was 38 weeks pregnant and tired in the deep way that only the last weeks bring, and she had started to feel watched. Not in any obvious way, not in a way she could point to, just a steady sense that someone was noticing her movements. A silver sedan parked a half block too long on her street 2 mornings in a row, gone before she could write down the plate. A man she didn't recognize came into the diner twice in 1 week, sat at the counter, ordered coffee, and read his newspaper in a way that seemed practiced, not natural. She mentioned both to Agent Holt at a follow-up meeting in the 2nd week of November. Agent Holt's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "We'll increase drive-bys in your area," she said. "If you see anything specific, call immediately." She paused. "The investigation into what happened on that trail is ongoing. The individuals responsible are known to us. We're being thorough." She looked at Sarah directly. "You did the right thing, Miss Calloway. I know that's easy to say and harder to live with. But you did." On the night of November 19th, Sarah went into labor. It was 3 in the morning when the contractions became real. She called Dottie, who arrived at her apartment in 12 minutes wearing a coat over her nightgown and a look of absolute determination. Dottie drove her to the hospital while Lily slept in the back seat, wrapped in a blanket, Captain tucked under her arm. Emma Grace Calloway was born at 6:47 in the morning, 7 pounds, 4 ounces. A wide-awake, deliberate, apparently fully prepared child who entered the world, looking around with the focused curiosity of someone who had been planning this for months and wanted to see if reality matched the specifications. Lily, who had been allowed into the room 20 minutes after, stood at the edge of the bed and stared at her new sister with an expression of profound recognition. "I knew she was going to look like that," she said quietly. "Captain told me." Dottie cried. Sarah cried. The nurse pretended not to. For 4 days, everything was simple, warm and contained. The hospital room felt like a pause in the larger story, a place where nothing complicated could reach them. Emma slept. Lily visited twice a day. Dottie brought food in containers. On the fourth day, there was a knock at the hospital room door. The man who entered was not Vincent Caruso. He was in his 60s, compact and neatly dressed, with silver hair and the kind of careful stillness that suggests a person who has spent a lifetime making calculations before speaking. He paused in the doorway, glanced around the room, and then said, "He says your casserole smelled like home." That was the first thing he noticed. The words stopped Sarah for a moment. He introduced himself as George Mancetti, an attorney, with offices in Memphis. He asked if Sarah had a few minutes. She looked at him for a moment, looked at Emma asleep in the bassinet. Then she said, "Yes." George Mancetti sat down and opened a leather folder. He explained. George Mancetti sat down and opened a leather folder. He explained in calm, measured terms that his client, whom he did not name directly, had learned about the birth and wanted to address some practical matters. There was a document, a trust, set up in the names of Lily Ann Calloway and Emma Grace Calloway. The principal amount was significant. Wasn't conditional. It wasn't a debt. It was, in the attorney's careful words, a recognition of a debt that cannot be adequately repaid, and a gesture offered freely, with no expectation of anything in return. Still and careful the way it always did when she needed to think clearly. A man like Vincent Caruso did not send attorneys to hospital rooms out of simple gratitude. She had understood enough about how his world operated to know that nothing in it was truly without strings, even gestures that appeared to be. She looked at Mancetti and asked the question she had to ask. "What does he expect from me?" Mancetti didn't flinch. He had clearly prepared for this. "Nothing," he said. "This is not a transaction. There is no obligation, no future contact expected or desired." He met her eyes. "My client is aware that you have a life entirely separate from his, and he intends to leave it that way." Sarah held his gaze. "I don't want this to put my daughters in danger," she said. "My client is aware of that concern," Mancetti said. "The trust is structured through multiple legal layers. There is no traceable connection. The individuals who created the circumstances that led to this situation have been—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Addressed. My client wanted you to know that." The word "addressed" hung in the air between them. Sarah chose not Tosk moored. She looked at the document again, then at Emma, then at the empty chair where Lily would sit in 2 hours when Dottie brought her for the evening visite. Teat. She thought about Danny's note in the kitchen drawer, about Marcus packing his bag on a Sunday morning, about 4 years of early mornings, late nights, swollen feet, $60 bank balances, a casserole waiting at home, and a worn stuffed bear that was supposed to keep the bad things away. She thought about a hand clawing up through dry earth, a pulse she had almost missed, and breathing that stopped and started again in the long shadows of an October afternoon. She remembered what her mother once told her. "Sarah, the world is not going to come and find you. You are going to have to go out and find it. And when something puts itself in front of you, you have to decide if you're brave enough to reach down." She looked at George Mancetti. "Does he know their names?" she asked. "He does." "Then tell him Emma says hello," she said. "And tell him Lily says Captain says thank you." The attorney looked at her for a moment with an expression she would spend a long time trying to name. It wasn't pity. It wasn't quite admiration. It was something quieter than both. He closed his leather folder, stood, and said, "I'll pass that along." He left. Sarah sat in the pale morning light of the hospital room, holding her newborn daughter, and realized that something had ended and something else had begun, though she wasn't sure what to call either one yet. 6 months passed. Spring came to Collierville in the slow, steady way it always does. First, the red buds bloomed along the fence lines, then the dogwoods, then that special green that only shows up in April in Tennessee, the kind that looks almost too bright to be real, as if the world is making up for winter. Sarah started her mornings earlier now, with Emma in the carrier and Lily at the kitchen table, eating cereal and asking questions that ranged from practical to deeply philosophical in just a few minutes. She had reduced her shifts at the Blue Ridge to 3 days a week. Dottie had also quietly, without discussion, given her a raise that put her hourly rate above what most full-time waitstaff in the county earned. When Sarah raised an eyebrow, Dottie had simply said, "You've been underpaid for 4 years, and I've been meaning to fix it," and walked away to yell at the cook about something unrelated. The trust for the girls was real. She had it reviewed by another attorney, a woman named Claire Hendricks, who specialized in estate law. After reading it, Claire's only comment was, "Whoever set this up didn't want it undone." The trust for the girls was real. She had it reviewed by another attorney, a woman named Claire Hendricks, who specialized in estate law. After reading it, Claire's only comment was, "Whoever set this up didn't want it undone." The money would be available to the girls at 18 for education and at 25 for general use. It wouldn't make them rich, but it would make them free. Free from the kind of pressure that had shaped their mother's whole adult life. The pressure of the next bill, the next shift, the next calculation of what she could and couldn't afford. Sarah thought about that a lot during those spring mornings. What would it mean to grow up without that weight? How would it change the options you could see? Vincent had survived. He was not prosecuted. The federal case that had been building around him was restructured in the months after the incident on the trail. What actually happened in those negotiations was never explained to Sarah, and she did not ask. She knew enough to understand that there were worlds operating in parallel to her own, and that she had briefly crossed paths with one of them. And the wise thing was not to reach further in than she already had. What she did know was that the men responsible for putting Vincent in that dirt embankment had faced consequences. She didn't ask for details. She didn't want them. It was enough to know that what started on that October afternoon had found its resolution, and that resolution had not required anything more from her. Raunt, expecting a regular. There was a man sitting at the counter. He was in his 50s, young with silver at his temples, and a face that had been very recently beaten and carefully healed, and wore the evidence of both. He was dressed in a plain, dark jacket. No expensive suit. No visible ring. He was looking down at the counter with the particular quietness of a man in a place he chose very carefully. For a moment, Sarah paused by the entry to the dining room, her eyes landing on the details she had memorized over 4 years, the cracked vinyl of the 8th booth, the ancient coffee machine rattling in the morning light, and, just beside the man, the old stool with the slightly crooked leg. She remembered how she used to steer elderly customers away from that exact stool, guiding them to somewhere safer, making small protective choices no one else noticed. Now she watched the man settle onto it, the world around her unchanged in its familiar flaws but somehow transformed, as if the meaning of home was both exactly as she left it and completely new. She had imagined this moment sometimes in the abstract, thinking it might feel threatening, awkward or heavy with everything they both knew. What she hadn't imagined was how ordinary it would feel, or how that ordinariness would be, in its own way, the most disarming thing of all. She reached for a mug. Her hand was steady. She filled it from the fresh pot and set it in front of him. He looked up. Their eyes met. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then he said, "I'd like some coffee, please. And whatever your eggs are like." "Eggs over easy is what we do best," she said. "That's fine," he said. She wrote the order and put it through the window. She came back to refill his coffee, even though he hadn't asked. He looked at the cup and then at her. "How are they?" he asked. "They're good," she said. Lily started second grade. Emma's pulling herself up to stand on things. He nodded. Something moved through his expression. Not soft exactly, but differently arranged than before. "Good," he said. "How are you?" she asked. A pause. "Different," he said. Not as an evasion, as a real answer. She nodded. She understood what that meant. She brought him his eggs. He ate them. He left a $50 tip on an $8 breakfast. She put it in the register and didn't mention it to Dottie. He never came back. She didn't expect him to. There are things you do in life that change who you are, and you don't always see the full effect until much later. Sometimes only when you watch your children do something that shows what they learned from you, and you recognize yourself in their choices. When Lily was 8, she volunteered at a local food pantry with her class and came home to tell Sarah about a man she had helped, whose hands were very shaky and who seemed embarrassed about needing help. "I just kept talking to him," Lily said, "so he wouldn't feel alone." Sarah looked at her daughter for a moment without saying anything. Then she said, "That was exactly the right thing to do." What Lily didn't know, what she might understand one day when she's old enough to know the whole story, was that she had already done that once before, at 6 years old, when she pressed a worn, one-eyed bear into her mother's hands and ran through the trees without looking back. That bear now sat on the shelf above Lily's bed, watching over both girls from the corner of their shared room. Captain, still on duty. Lily would sometimes point him out to Emma when she was fussy in the evenings. "He knows things," she told her baby sister with complete conviction. "You just have to trust him." Sarah overheard that one evening from the hallway and stood there for a moment with her hand on the doorframe, feeling the full weight of the year move through her. The October light, the cracked sand, the pulse she had almost missed, and the sound of a child's boots running hard through the trees. She let it settle, the way you finally settle something you've carried a long time and now know exactly where it belongs. Sometimes, the bravest thing isn't a grand gesture. It's a small, quiet choice made when no one is watching, when it would be so much easier to keep walking. Sarah Calloway was 8 months pregnant, alone in the woods, with a 6-year-old child and no phone signal and no obligation to anyone. She reached down anyway. That one act set things in motion that would shape 2 little girls' lives in ways they were still discovering years later. And in the quiet of the evening woods, after everything was set in motion, all you could hear was the soft sound of leaves underfoot, reminding us that courage often arrives as something gentle, barely noticed, and that the world sometimes changes with nothing more than a single step forward. The woods were ordinary. The afternoon was ordinary. Not only the choice was extraordinary. I want to sit with you for just one more moment before we close this story. You have just heard about a woman who had nothing and chose something anyway, who raised 2 daughters not on the money or circumstances that changed later, but on the example she set in the moment that counted most. Lily learned to keep talking so people don't feel alone. She learned it from her mother, in the woods, at age 6, without anyone teaching her directly. That is how values pass from one generation to the next, not in speeches. In small moments, children are watching far more carefully than we ever realize. What would you have done on that trail if it were you, 8 months pregnant, your child standing 20 feet away, a dangerous man's hand clawing out of the dirt? Would you have stayed or kept walking? Be honest with yourself. There's no wrong answer. Both choices are human. But the question tells you something important. Is there a moment in your own life you look back on when you made the hard choice even though the easy one was right there? I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Those stories matter. They remind us what we're capable of. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Stories like Sarah's deserve to reach the people who need them. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and click the bell so you never miss our upcoming stories. Next time, it will tell a story that starts with a letter found inside a wall of a house being torn down, and the name on that letter changes everything for the family living there. You won't want to miss it. But for now, remember Sarah. Remember Lily running through the trees with her red coat flying. Remember Captain, one-eyed and patched, still watching over 2 little girls from a shelf in Tennessee. The next time life places something difficult in front of you, something daunting or easily ignored, pause and ask yourself one important question. Will you choose to act? I believe the answer is yes, more often than we realize.